Welcome, lady lads, gentle lads, and all manner of other mech lads out there, to another MechWarrior 5 AMA breakdown session with your host, Smastian. In this AMA, we went over a lot of the stuff that had already been gone over in previous AMA sessions, as this was intended to be a new sort of introduction to people who purchased the pre-order within recent weeks. Just getting them up to speed, answering their questions so that if, in case they haven't run into breakdowns such as mine or anyone else's, that they could get their questions addressed, which tended to have a lot of overlap with the questions that have already been asked in prior AMAs. That said, the folk who have already been to the prior AMAs did ask some intriguing questions that did give us a bit more information about the game, and so, roughly speaking, this podcast is going to be split into two parts. The first part, I'm going to cover all of the new information that we have, and in the second part, it's going to be a recap of, or an update on the stuff that was asked previously, because there's also some tiny bits of information in there, and timestamps will be provided for both. And without further ado, let's just get right into it. The hottest topic, that, in my mind anyway, concerning this AMA, was questions about Epic Store exclusivity. What with the recent controversies surrounding games like Borderlands, Phoenix Point, and what was the other one? The one by Obsidian. Ooh, the Outer Worlds, I think it was. Anyway, given all of these controversies, what with Epic bribing studios into going exclusive on their platform, there was a worry, since MechWarrior 5 is built on the Unreal 4 engine, that such a possibility does exist for MechWarrior 5. Will we be forced to deal with that sort of, well, let's not mince words, nonsense? Russ's responses to this, Russ Bullock being the CEO of Piranha Games Interactive, he answered in rather vague terms, although piecing together various of his answers on this subject throughout the AMA. I'm gonna say, as a TLDR of this particular point, that it's not necessarily going to happen. As a dev, naturally, Russ Bullock does like what Epic is offering. The greater profit share for the studios on the Epic platform is a very big incentive. And of course, he does wish that Steam would try to follow suit in some way and make better offerings of their own. That said, the official statement that he gave was that there are no plans for an Epic Store release at present, nor are there any plans to move away from Steam, and this is where the other data that I'm piecing together comes in. A GOG release has been announced, or at least the plans for a GOG release. Furthermore, Russ did say that he still plans on going forward with Steam Workshop integration. So, given that all of these plans are in place, yes, it is not unheard of that he could, at the last moment, decide, okay, no, we're going to go take Epic's offer and go exclusive with them, because this has happened in the past. He's aware of it, we're aware of it. But for now, given that he did announce for the first time today, or on Wednesday, that there is a planned GOG release, it seems as though the studio is moving towards a broad platform sort of, well, multi-platform marketing. And the final point that does assuage some fears about MechWarrior 5 becoming an Epic Store exclusive is that Russ did spend a lot of time later on highlighting that the best way, because someone did ask, what is the best way for, on which platform should we purchase MechWarrior 5? in order to give PGI the highest cut of profits. And so naturally, the best way to do that is to purchase via the MechWarrior 5 portal, which is mw5mercs.com. Given that the architecture exists for a direct purchase from the MechWarrior 5 portal, for now at least, it still does lend to the idea that we are unlikely to see an Epic Store release. And yeah, so the way the architecture would work there is that you would purchase the game direct from the portal, and they would give you a key to whichever platform, or a product key to whichever platform you would so choose. Overall, I'm still a bit on the fence about this, but I'm willing to keep my fears in check on the matter. And with that out of the way, let's move on to brighter topics. The first of which shall be modding. As to modding, the first AMA on this subject is going to be sometime mid-June-ish, from the sounds of it. They want to get this AMA done closer to the release date once a lot of the core systems have been nailed down a lot better, and there isn't going to be so much mechanical fiddling in the background with the engine and so forth. Furthermore, a member of the MechWarrior Living Legends team asked about a potential transfer of MechWarrior Living Legends onto the Unreal 4 engine by using MechWarrior 5's assets as some sort of base to kickstart the mod potentially. Given that the state of modding for this game is still rather murky, as well as I said, we're still quite a ways away from the proper release date, which is supposed to be sometime in September. But there are some general guide notes that are being taken into consideration, such as the fact that, so long as you use the assets provided by MechWarrior 5 or MechWarrior Living Legends in the Living Legends team case, there shouldn't be any problems with copyright. Overall, it's still very hazy. Like, there were some potential musings as to whether or not the modders would have to use the MechWarrior 5 dev kit or some sort of modding tools that PGI would provide for the game in order to make the mods. That is still unclear, but PGI will be getting in contact with a lot of the larger modding groups just to touch base before launch so that, nobody is going to be stepping on each other's toes, as that has been a weird bit of contention on that subject in the past, especially in the case of MechWarrior Living Legends. Putting to rest the idea that there's ever going to be an alpha release, I think I've said this before, but I'm going to reiterate. There is not going to be an alpha release. They're only going to do a public beta sometime late August to early September before the original release window. So, no sense asking further on that front. Folk did ask what kind of performance requirements your system needs to have in order to run this game. Comparisons being drawn against MechWarrior Online, specifically. Given that the game is going to be built on the Unreal 4 engine, a slight GPU bump may be in order. For reference's sake, a GTX 760 or equivalent was able to run MechWarrior Online on high settings at reasonable frame rates, supposedly. At 1080p resolutions, let's say, or more likely a 720p resolution if you wanted good frame rates. But something in the ballpark of 30 to 60 frames was what you could get out of a GTX 760 on that, at 720p likely. If you want the same sort of performance on a 1080p monitor, you're likely going to have to bump up a little bit. Furthermore, a quad-core i5 is probably going to be a good bet as a minimum spec CPU. Aside from that, Russ said that they're still too early in the dev cycle in order to give proper estimates. But given the way that the pre-order incentives are currently lining up, they want to definitely get that sort of ballpark estimate out before the end of April, and definitely before the end of April, and preferably within the next week or so. They should probably be posting the announcement on the MechWarrior 5 Discord one of these days. I guess we'll have to see. Beyond that, Linux support on launch is unfortunately not planned. Sorry for the Linux boys out there, but I suppose this is really par for the course as far as Linux is concerned. So nothing out of the ordinary there. Again, sorry, Linux fanboys. Questions were asked about a potential cloud streaming integration with Stadia, I believe it's called, and anything like it really. Just the game streaming cloud platforms that have been coming out recently. Russ's official position on this matter is that it sounds like a cute idea. They'll see how it develops over time, but for now, there is no plans in place in order to get integration running with that. On that note, however, potential console ports are in the cards, as Russ has said that PGI has been in talks with Microsoft and that there wouldn't need to necessarily even be many changes in order to get the console port running. So look forward to that potentially. We'll no doubt find out a bit more about that a little further down the line. Another thing that should be laid to rest now is that DLC is not a priority for the dev team. So questions on the subject have naturally been as vague as in the past. Usually the answers have come in the form of we haven't thought about it yet, and so speculating on it is somewhat irrelevant to us right now. And the final bit of how do I say it? The final new point of information that hasn't been covered in the past is in regards to pre-orders sold and in what kind of quantity they have been sold. Russ was reluctant to answer this in concrete terms, but he did say that less people have pre-ordered this game than were involved in the MWO Founders Program. Largely, he attributes this to a question of time and place, given that folk are more wary of pre-orders these days. That said, he is still pretty happy with the numbers from the sounds of it. Of course, they could be better. But, you know, I guess your mileage may vary. As an additional note on this front, marketing for the game will largely relies on word of mouth spread and the occasional reach out to influencers, like the recent video done by Ars Technica. And at some point, no doubt, Barradool, Beef, or Snuggles, and all of the other MechWarrior YouTubers, they'll no doubt be featuring this game at some point. That said, there won't be a sweeping marketing campaign. Well, make of that what you will. And now, for the second half of the podcast, an update on the responses from prior AMAs, and word of caution, again, there's going to be a lot of reiteration here, folks. So, language support at launch is still slated to be eFigs, that is English, French, Italian, German, and Spanish. Will there be any VR and head tracking systems on launch? No, these will not be integrated, or at least it'll be very unlikely, especially given that all they will really facilitate is the ability to look around in cockpit. So, given that you're either way going to be stuck inside the cockpit, there's no real incentive to build that system in at launch when that sort of dev time can be spent elsewhere. As post-launch content, it'll more than likely make its way in, because these are the sorts of peripherals that a lot of the mech sim folk really would enjoy having. PGI is aware of this, they'll more than likely put it in. Turning now to the updates on the story, or in the case of folk who haven't, who are for the first time listening to an AMA breakdown such as this, we'll be covering all of the points that have been, well, a lot of the points that have been covered in prior AMAs. Essentially, what is the scope of the story is the first point I'll address. You are, as stated before, a small fish in a very big pond. You will not have any dramatic, sweeping effects on the big battles that'll occur in the galaxy during the time span of the game. You'll only really hear about them by proxy. Your role is to take contracts from the great houses on like minor skirmishes, frontier issues, quelling pirate uprisings, all of this sort of stuff. I mean, the story missions will of course be better fleshed out than just this, as well as a lot of the side content that is handcrafted. But don't expect to be pulling miracles on the galactic scale. Outside of the campaign, you'll have access to an instant access or instant action mode, and from the sounds of it, it'll have a fairly robust scenario editor. We'll have to see how that looks like when it does launch, but I have some optimism in this regard. I speculate that you will be able to. Excuse me. I speculate that you will be able to fiddle around with stuff like tile sets, potentially, enemy density spawns, and so on. They have the room to make this a good system. The question is, will they? But given that you should potentially be able to play some of the story missions inside the instant action editor, or things similar to them, optimism on this front for me remains high. I'm expecting something fairly fleshed out. In terms of story cutscenes, those will not exist, nor will sketch scenes like in Harebrained Schemes Battletech. All of it will be presented in real time through, well, voice acting largely, and to a lot of degree text as well, I imagine. But don't be expecting movie miracles here either. Furthermore, once you complete the game, the plan on the table is to have the game freeze its end state so that you can continue playing after the timeline has run its course. And that about does it really for covering story elements and grand campaign elements that were already covered before. Co-op mode, then. There has been some more said about this. Where to begin, really? First off, in order to somewhat assuage the fears of those who worry that there won't be enough reward for simply playing with your friends on their file in a co-op sort of way via the peer-to-peer networking, as has been discussed before. PGI is working on making some sort of reward system for the co-op players. It's not necessarily going to be, you'll be able to put your assets into your own mercenary company assets into your friend's game, and you'll be able to pull assets that you quote unquote own in his game onto your game, and so on and so forth. But there should be some sort of reward in place for it. And in regards to the quote unquote grind wall, as I've called it before, for access to co op in the campaign, as has been stated before you're actually able to bring in a friend into the co op campaign, you first have to acquire another mech and other mech warriors. But the problem is, you only start out with the one mech and yourself on your own. So, Unfortunately, nothing is going to be done about that too much. There are narrative reasons behind it, and you'll unfortunately just have to go through that 1 to 2 hours before you get your first mech. Or it should happen fairly quickly. 1 to 2 hours is like a ballpark estimate. It's probably going to happen within like the first 30 minutes, honestly, depending on how quickly you go through a tutorial mission, no doubt. It still strikes me as a bit of a steep hurdle, but changes to this are unlikely to be made at this stage, so I guess we'll just have to live with it. Honestly, maybe it'll be more bearable than I worry it will, or worry it will not be. But for now, we'll just have to wait and see how it turns out. Many folk, moving on, many folk expressed some worry about the destructibility of buildings after the MechCon demo. And to specifically address that, Russ stated in no uncertain terms that what was seen at the demo is not what they currently have right now. The MechCon demo, the building destruction system that was in place there was pushed by Russ specifically, and he said so himself during the AMA, that he wanted to push that specific system into the demo just so that the showcase would be there and ready to go. But it was only meant as a showcase. What they have now feels a lot more natural. It's not going to be as easy to just walk your way through a building and have it tear apart in front of you like a bit of paper mache. It's going to be a proper, robust structure. Stuff that you can jump jet onto potentially as a light mech, get onto the top of. You're not necessarily going to sink through it because it's made of paper. It actually has some reinforced structure to it, as you would expect. Anyway, hopefully that assuages the fears of those people. Moving on, however, many questions were also asked in regards to the overall feel of the game. I'm going to sort of lump them all into this one answer here. But think stuff like jump jet scaling, the presence of mud slowing mechs down, and other of these sort of like weird aesthetic, fluffy, feely bits, if you know what I mean. Also, many comparisons were being drawn back to MechWarrior Online in terms of balancing weapons against each other and so on and so forth. And the general answer to these sorts of questions was, don't worry about it. There isn't going to be any sort of heavy PvP balancing in place because this is meant as a single player experience. So the overall goal is to make the game feel cool. They're trying to convey that feel of piloting a big stompy robot. And to that effect, jump jets, since they don't have to be balanced as a PvP element, they can just be as powerful as they say in the fluff in some cases. I mean, it's not necessarily going to be following the fluff completely, but it will be there, or it will be made in such a way so as to feel as though, you're powerful, or you have a mech that is small that can jump jet really high because that's what it was designed to do. Or it's light enough, it should be able to do this. Or in the case of an Atlas, it should feel weighty, bulky, and meaty as it's striding across the battlefield and taking damage. And the way that big weapon hits register on an Atlas isn't going to be the same way that a big weapon hits a spider mech, for example. So all of this has been taken into consideration in some way or other, and the devs more or less are following the rule of cool. There will be some balancing, but the rule of cool, in a lot of cases, will trump a lot of balancing considerations. This also links into knockdowns in melee. Honestly, this will not be added into the game because it takes up too much animation and development time. Furthermore, because this is going to be a first-person experience largely, Melee won't necessarily look really good. Melee from a first-person perspective is often pretty janky. I mean, if anyone remembers Halo 1's pistol whip, they'll understand just how strange some of those melee animations were. Or the melee animation for the Needler in Halo 1. The Master Chief takes it off of his hand, smashes it like pointy needle side, which normally point to you when you're actually holding the gun, but smashes the pointy needle sides into the enemy, puts it back onto his hand after another 180-degree twist, and then starts firing again. It's such a weird animation. It's probably the biggest criticism I have of Halo 1, come to think of it. Just how janky some of those animations look. Or the ways in which the rocket's melee attack worked, or the sniper rifle's melee attack was. All of it was just so weird. And so, to that effect, the PGI doesn't want to spend a whole lot of time on this, and well, an estimated dev time that was provided for Russ in order to implement a melee and knockdown system to make it feel good and not look too janky. He estimated that would take 6 to 12 months with the highest skilled dev team they have on hand. Ultimately, it isn't worth it to introduce these sorts of mechanics from a development perspective at this stage. So, while there are many people who are looking forward to the lore-friendly nature of the melee combat system, it's not going to be implemented. Unfortunately, we sort of have to forget about it. Play some harebrained schemes Battletech if we really want melee integration again. Either way, hopefully that puts that whole topic to rest. Moving on then to the topic of mechs. This is largely just going to cover ground that has already been covered for those who are here for the first time. In case you didn't know, in order to create a lot of mechs in MechWarrior 5, they simply transported existing models from MechWarrior Online and rigged them to be compatible with Unreal Engine's architecture, rather than that of CryEngine. So the likelihood of encountering non-MechWarrior Online mechs is going to be minimal to non-existent. That said, stuff like PGI originals like the Corsair and potentially the Roughneck are likely to make their way in. And in fact, there is, according to Russ, a story mission that does feature the Corsair as a mech. So make of that what you will. Many questions were also asked about hero and champion variants and other sort of unique variants of mechs. The answer that Russ literally gave was, quote, "Great question, let's move on," unquote. Together with what was already said on the subject in prior AMAs, these sorts of unique variants are likely going to be tied to spoilers, if I had to speculate. So if they do exist in the game, they're pretty spoiler intensive, so they don't want to answer these questions too concretely. And you will furthermore be unlikely to acquire them via salvage. They sound like the sort of thing you would get as a mission reward, honestly. Overall, however, there are going to be 50 unique chassis, more or less, with a total subvariant count in the range of 200 to 250-ish. So, what does that work out into? Like 5 variants per mech, essentially? So 5 different variants of a Centurion, which is more than likely going to be in. We've already seen the Marauder as a mech. That's going to be in, so 5 variants of a Marauder on average. 5 variants of a Panther, 5 variants of a Wolfhound even maybe. I don't know actually. Is the Wolfhound... Does the Wolfhound exist in timeline? I don't remember. Clan mechs. That question came up a lot again. Nope. No sign of clan mechs. Stop asking. Speculation naturally that it might be DLC content or whatever, but for now, just there's no clan mechs. It's only going to be inner sphere mechs. The clan, even in the timeline, the clans will not be met. So, getting your hands on clan tech is going to be really weird. Lastly, on the point of mechs, Reactor critical meltdowns. These are still being experimented with, whether or not they do damage to you, whether or not they happen very spectacularly or not, or whether or not your mech is just going to explode. It's uncertain yet how they're going to implement it, but it's still a thing that is being fooled around with. Moving on then, people did ask about the dropship. Nothing new here to report other than the fact that, just for the folk who haven't heard this before, the dropship you'll be using throughout the campaign is the Leopard dropship. It'll have a grand total of 12 mech bays that you can take advantage of towards the end of the game. It's unclear whether or not it will have an upgrade path in order to unlock those mech bays or other things. Why do I say upgrade path? Because there were plans that were being experimented with that you would eventually upgrade yourself to using a Union class dropship somewhere down the line. This idea seems to have been backburnered, however, and Russ did reiterate this in the recent AMA. And if I had to guess, let me try that again. My guess is that it's going to be retooled into a DLC potentially. Because it sounds as though some of the assets were already being worked on or that they're there, and it's just a matter of implementing them, fleshing them out, and, well, fleshing them out first, then implementing them, but apparently they don't want to give away too much dev time to this particular venture. Final 2 points then, the first of which is marketplace mechanics. Some interesting points were raised in regard to this. Firstly, there's not going to be any form of global market. Markets will be tied to specific planets, sort of like actually exactly how you have more or less in Harebrained Schemes Battletech. The marketplace system is going to function very similarly to that, but, and this is an interesting one and where the update comes in, there was some speculation being thrown around by Russ that potentially you will see multiple markets on one planet. So he wasn't really clear with this, but if I take the meaning correctly, you'll be getting different markets for different factions you encounter on the specific world. So if Liao and Merrick are fighting over a planet, you will see a different marketplace for Liao and a different marketplace for Merrick, and maybe even a different marketplace for the black market if you have access to it. So that is an interesting thing, and we'll see whether or not that actually gets implemented and integrated. But for now, it's an interesting thing to mull over. It does give us something to think about. And lastly, on the subject of mech customization, in terms of updates, well, nothing new has been really changed. Mech customization is still going to follow the model of each variant has specific weapons that it can mount in weapon specific slots. So no longer will you be able to mount AC-20s onto commandos unless that commando has an AC-20 slot specifically. If it's just a generic ballistic slot on a mech, if those will ever exist, well then you can swap things into there. But from the sounds of it, mechs are being designed such that their variants will mount the particular loadout that that variant was supposed to have. So in the case of an Atlas, it's going to mount maybe 1 or 2 LRM-20s, an AC-20, and 3 or 4 medium lasers. I don't know which variant that would be. I'm just sort of ballparking or scratching the back of my head, um, trying to remember what my first Atlas variant was in MechWarrior Online. Either way, you won't be able to swap the AC-20 down to an AC-10 in this case. All you'll be able to do is swap that specific AC-20 out for an AC-20 of a different manufacturer. One that has, say, a bonus to accuracy, but a debuff to damage, or a buff to damage, but a debuff to accuracy, or a buff to both accuracy and damage, whatever it happens to be. This is where the customization component of that will come in. And this is done in order to make each of the mech variants useful and feel fresh and new compared to the other variants of that mech, and it'll give you a reason in order to pursue a particular playstyle, if you so choose. And in terms of customization outside of, like, the mech lab, or, just swapping, what you can do, additionally, I should mention, is, say, take off a couple of medium lasers and put in a couple of heat sinks, that sort of stuff. That is what you will be able to do. And beyond that, you also have the ability to customize your mech, as said before, with camo patterns, decals, and colors. This is the only form of customization that will be available at launch. No internal cockpit items, no war horns, no lights, no baubles. None of that. And with that, that sort of wraps up everything that there was to say about the recent MechWarrior 5 AMA. Let's take another sip of liquid. I guess the final point I should mention is that a lot of the 3D models have already, well, all of the 3D models have already been brought into the game. A lot of the artistic assets have already been completed on that front. And it sounds as though the devs are currently in just the tweaking and optimization phase of getting the engine to, well, not spurg out too hard. And yeah, that brings this AMA breakdown to a close. I guess as a final note, I can mention that the MechWarrior Online review that has been in the works so far is still a bit of a ways off. I do want to reach Tier 1 before I offer my final opinions on the game, because they have changed as I've played it more. So once I get those thoughts collected, and once I experience what it's like to actually play at Tier 1 versus Tier 2, 3, 4, and 5, get that laid out, so that I'm not lying to people about what the new player experience is and what is eventually to come down the line. I just want this properly sorted out in my mind, and I want to properly experience it for myself before I offer my opinion on it. Yeah, I've seemed to have backburnered this project quite heavily, but no, trust me, I am still working on it. It is there. I'm just not comfortable releasing it yet. Furthermore, I'm going to give a quick shout out to Kibs' channel. In the description below, you will find a link to a lore video that he has put out. Do feel free to check that out. It's pretty good stuff there concerning the Star League and the early formation of the Star League, actually, so pre-Star League era. I believe it's just after the fall of the Terran Republic, was it? I'm not the lore guy. Kibs is the lore guy. Go watch the video, and he'll tell you exactly what it's about. Feel free to subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content like this, and don't forget to leave a follow, a like, or a comment. Follows. Follows don't exist on YouTube. But again, don't forget to leave a like or a comment. Send us some feedback, or if I got any of this information wrong, be sure to point it out in the comment sections below. And without further ado, that brings this to a close. So I'm going to say, have a good day, everyone, and I'll see you on the battlefield.